Have you ever lost track of time while hiking and felt like you were much farther from civilization than you actually were? It's a strange feeling, isolating, eerie, but it passes once you see another person or reach the trailhead. But sometimes, that feeling sticks with you, lingering like a shadow, whispering that you're not alone, even when there's no one else around. That's what happened to me last year. I had always been an outdoorsy person. Living in a small town near the Appalachian Trail gave me easy access to miles of hiking trails, and I took full advantage of it. After a long week of work, there was nothing I loved more than packing up my gear and heading out for a weekend hike. Sometimes I'd go with friends, but most of the time, I went alone. I liked the solitude, the peace and quiet of being in the woods with only my thoughts for company. One weekend in late September, I decided to hike a trail I hadn't explored before. It was a less popular path, one that veered off the main trail and wound deeper into the forest. I had read about it in a local hiking forum. People said it was beautiful but easy to get lost on, especially since parts of it weren't well marked. That only made it more appealing to me. I liked the idea of being off the beaten path, away from the crowds. I packed light, just enough for a day hike. I planned to start early, finish by mid-afternoon, and be back home by evening. The weather was perfect. Cool but not cold, with a light breeze that rustled the leaves overhead. I set off with a map, water, and some snacks, confident that I could handle whatever the trail threw at me. The first few hours were uneventful. The trail was overgrown in places, but still manageable. I didn't see another person the entire time, which wasn't surprising given how remote this part of the forest was. I liked it that way. The sounds of birds and the occasional rustling in the underbrush were my only companions. Around noon, I stopped to eat a sandwich and check my map. I had made good progress, but I was still a couple of hours away from the point where the trail looped back toward the main path. I figured I had plenty of time, so I wasn't in a rush. That's when I noticed something strange. I had stopped near a clearing, a wide open space in the forest where the trees thinned out. The ground was covered in moss, soft and green, and there were no signs that anyone had been there recently, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. There was nothing visibly wrong, no sounds that shouldn't have been there. But as I looked around, I realized what it was. The forest was too quiet. The birds had stopped singing, the wind had died down, and even the usual rustling of small animals in the bushes was gone. It was like the forest was holding its breath. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to my imagination, and started packing up my things. As I slung my backpack over my shoulder, I noticed something else, something that made my skin crawl. There, in the soft moss of the clearing, were footprints. They weren't mine. I knelt down to get a closer look. The footprints were fresh, the edges of the impression still sharp in the moss. They were big, larger than any I had ever seen, and they led off into the woods, toward a part of the forest I hadn't planned on exploring. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't seen anyone else on the trail all day. I hadn't even heard anyone, but these footprints were fresh and they didn't belong to me. I hesitated, debating whether or not to follow them. Every instinct told me to turn back, to stick to the trail and forget about the footprints, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to know who or what had made them. So, I followed the footprints. At first, the trail was easy to follow. The footprints were deep, easy to spot in the moss and dirt. But after a while, the ground became rockier and the trail grew harder to follow. The trees grew closer together, their branches casting long shadows across the forest floor. I kept going, though driven by a mix of curiosity and unease. The further I went, the more I felt like I was being watched. It wasn't just a passing feeling either. It was constant, like eyes were on me the entire time. I stopped every few minutes, turning around, scanning the trees for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. Just the quiet, still forest and the sound of my own breathing. After about an hour, I reached a small ravine. The footprints led down into it, disappearing into a dense patch of underbrush. I stood at the edge, looking down, debating whether or not to continue. I was far off the trail at this point, and if I got lost, it would be difficult for anyone to find me. But something about the footprints kept pulling me forward. I needed to know where they led. I descended into the ravine, the air growing cooler as I went. The trees overhead blocked out most of the sunlight, casting the area in shadow. The underbrush was thick, and I had to push my way through, the branches scratching at my arms and legs. But I kept going, determined to see where the trail led. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the footprints stopped. I stood there, staring at the ground, trying to make sense of it. The footprints had been so clear, so distinct, but now they were gone. There was no sign of anyone, no trail, no broken branches, nothing. It was like whoever, or whatever, had made them had just vanished. I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned around, looking back the way I had come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the shadows darker. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. And then I heard it. A soft rustling sound, like something moving through the underbrush. It was faint, but it was there, just beyond the trees. I froze, my heart racing. I strained to listen, my eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. The rustling grew louder, closer, and then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A figure. It was just a flash, a glimpse of something dark moving between the trees. My stomach dropped, and for a moment I couldn't move. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind racing. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the forest floor, branches whipping at my face and arms as I sprinted back toward the trail. I didn't care about the footprints anymore. I didn't care about finding out who, or what, had made them. All I cared about was getting out of there. I ran for what felt like hours, my lungs burning, my legs aching, but I didn't stop. Not until I reached the clearing where I had first found the footprints. And that's when I saw it. A figure, standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the trees. It was tall, its form shadowy and indistinct, but I knew it was the same figure I had seen in the ravine. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't follow. It just stood there, silent and still, its eyes, if it had eyes, locked on me. I turned and ran, not stopping until I reached the main trail. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if it was still there. By the time I reached my car, the sun was beginning to set. I drove home in silence, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been followed, watched. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept expecting to see the figure standing outside my window, watching me from the shadows, but it never came. At least, not that night. A few days later, I went back to the trailhead, hoping to find some explanation for what I had seen. But when I got there, the trail was closed. A sign posted at the entrance said there had been a landslide, and the trail was no longer safe for hikers. I haven't been back since. I don't plan on it. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind rustles the leaves outside my window, I wonder if the figure is still out there, waiting. And I wonder if one day it will come looking for me again,